In rural Alabama, 1963, where social tensions ran deeper than century-old oak roots, one farmer's split-second decision would change everything. This is the incredible true story of how a whispered plea for help in the darkness led to an act of courage that proved sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary heroism. Before we dive into this powerful story of moral courage, hit that subscribe button if you believe in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. What happens next will show you what true bravery really looks like. The whisper in the darkness. The August heat hung over Franklin County like a suffocating blanket, even at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Jeremiah Foster wiped sweat from his forehead as he finished checking irrigation lines in his cotton field, his flashlight cutting through the humid darkness. At 61, Jeremiah was carved from Alabama clay itself. Weathered hands that had worked this land for 4 decades, shoulders still broad despite his age, and blue eyes that held the steady gaze of someone who knew what mattered. His cotton farm wasn't the biggest in Franklin County, but it was honest work. The year 1963 had been challenging. The civil rights movement was reaching its peak, and tensions in rural Alabama were at a breaking point. Just 5 months earlier, images of police dogs and fire hoses turned on Birmingham protesters had shocked the nation. Jeremiah tried to stay out of politics. He had a farm to run, bills to pay, and no patience for angry rhetoric that dominated every conversation in town. But staying neutral was becoming impossible in a place where silence was often interpreted as taking sides. As he walked toward his farmhouse, Jeremiah heard something that made him stop dead, rustling in tall grass near his property line, followed by labored breathing. "Hello?" he called out, raising his flashlight. "Someone there?" The breathing stopped, but after a moment a voice emerged from the darkness, young, male, and filled with terror. "Sir, they're coming after me," the voice whispered, barely audible above chirping crickets. Jeremiah's blood ran cold. In Franklin County in 1963, when a young black man whispered those words in darkness, it usually meant trouble of the worst kind. "Who's coming after you, son?" Jeremiah asked, keeping his voice low. A figure emerged from the grass, a young black man, maybe 20, wearing torn clothes and bleeding from a cut above his left eye. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath, eyes darting constantly toward the road. "Please, sir," the young man gasped. "I didn't do nothing wrong. I was walking home from work, and these men started following me in their truck. They got baseball bats, sir. They said they was going to teach me a lesson about staying in my place." Jeremiah felt his stomach clench. He'd heard stories like this, young black men targeted by white vigilantes who took it upon themselves to enforce what they saw as proper social order. "What's your name, son?" "Jerome Washington, sir. I work at the sawmill in Russellville. I was walking the back roads home to avoid trouble, but they found me anyway." Jeremiah knew the sawmill, one of the few places employing both black and white workers, though in segregated roles. The walk from Russellville to the black section of Franklin County was nearly 8 miles on back roads through isolated territory. How many men? 4, maybe 5, in a blue pickup with no front license plate. They got out and chased me through the woods when I ran. I think I lost them, but... Jerome's voice trailed off as distant engine sounds became audible, growing steadily louder. Jeremiah's mind raced. He could tell Jerome to keep running and go back to his house. It would be safe, smart. Getting involved could bring serious consequences: social ostracism, economic retaliation, maybe violence against his own family. But as the engine sound grew closer and he saw absolute terror in Jerome's eyes, Jeremiah Foster made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Come on," he said firmly, grabbing Jerome's arm. "We're going to the house, quick and quiet." They moved swiftly across the cotton field, staying low and using planted rows as cover. Behind them, headlights swept across the road, and Jeremiah could hear the truck slowing, its occupants searching for their quarry. The farmhouse was 200 yards away, but it felt like 2 miles as they crept through darkness. Jeremiah's heart pounded as he realized the full implications. If those men saw Jerome, entering his house. They reached the back porch just as the truck turned into Jeremiah's driveway, headlights sweeping across the front yard. "Stay low," Jeremiah whispered, fumbling for his key. "Don't make a sound." Inside, the house was dark and quiet. Martha had been asleep for hours. He led Jerome through the kitchen into the small pantry, a windowless room where food was stored during canning season. "You'll be safe in here," Jeremiah whispered. "Don't come out no matter what you hear, understand?" Jerome nodded, eyes wide with gratitude and fear. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you, but if they find me here—" "They won't," Jeremiah said with more confidence than he felt. "Just stay quiet." Heavy footsteps sounded on his front porch, followed by aggressive pounding. "Open up!" a gruff voice shouted. "We know you're in there!" Jeremiah took a deep breath, smoothed his work shirt, and walked to the front door. Through the window, he could see 4 men, all white, all carrying baseball bats or axe handles. Their truck sat in his driveway, engine running. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it firmly behind him. "Evening, gentlemen. Something I can help you with." The leader was Buck Anderson, who owned a small garage in town and was known for loud opinions about racial issues. Anderson was about 40, heavy-set, with arms like tree trunks, and eyes that held the cold gleam of someone who enjoyed intimidating others. "Jeremiah," Anderson said, his voice deceptively friendly, "sorry to bother you so late. We're looking for a troublemaking boy who ran through your property. Young black buck, probably cut up from running through woods. You see anybody like that?" Jeremiah met Anderson's gaze steadily. "I've been checking my irrigation lines for the past hour. Haven't seen anybody." "You sure about that?" Another man stepped forward, Eddie Pike from the feed store. "We tracked him right to your property line. He didn't just disappear." "Well, he didn't come through my yard," Jeremiah replied calmly. "Maybe he kept running along the creek bed. That would be smart if he was trying to avoid being seen." Anderson studied Jeremiah's face, looking for deception. "Jeremiah, you know we've always gotten along. You're a good man, hard worker. But times are changing, and a man's got to choose which side he's on. I'm on the side of minding my own business and letting others do the same." "That's not how it works anymore," Pike interjected. "The federal government's trying to force integration on us, destroy our way of life. Every white man needs to stand together." Jeremiah felt his temper rising, but kept his voice level. "What exactly did this young man do that's got you boys so worked up?" Anderson and Pike exchanged glances. "He was walking where he didn't belong," Anderson said finally. "Acting uppity, not showing proper respect. That behavior needs correction before it spreads." "Walking where he didn't belong. Last I checked, public roads were public roads." Tension ratcheted up several notches. The other 2 men shifted nervously and tightened grips on their weapons. "Jeremiah," Anderson said, voice taking on a harder edge, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Have you seen the boy we're looking for?" Jeremiah looked at the 4 men on his porch, men who had appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner for a young man whose only crime was walking home from work. He thought about Jerome huddled in his pantry, terrified and bleeding, and he thought about the kind of man he wanted to be when this night was over. "No," he said firmly, "I haven't seen him." Anderson stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Jeremiah, we'll take you at your word, but if you're lying to us, that would be a shame, a real shame." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Anderson turned to leave, but Pike remained for a moment longer. "You know, Jeremiah," Pike said quietly, "a man's reputation is fragile. Takes years to build, but can be destroyed in one night. You might want to think about that." As the 4 men climbed back into their truck and drove away, Jeremiah remained on his porch, watching their taillights disappear. His hands were shaking slightly, and he realized he was sweating despite the evening breeze. Inside his house, hidden in a dark pantry, a terrified young man waited to learn whether his life would be saved or destroyed by the moral courage of a farmer who had chosen to do what was right instead of what was safe. The weight of conscience. Jeremiah stood on his porch for several minutes after the truck disappeared, listening to familiar night sounds and trying to process what had happened. Everything seemed normal. but he knew nothing would ever be quite the same. He had just lied to 4 armed men to protect a stranger, a black stranger, in a time and place where such actions carried serious consequences. The smart thing would be to get Jerome out quickly and hope that would be the end of it. But as Jeremiah walked back inside, he found himself thinking about something his father had told him. "Son, there comes a time in every man's life when he has to decide what kind of person he really is. When that moment comes, you'll know it, and you'll have to live with whatever choice you make." Tonight was that moment. Jeremiah tapped softly on the pantry door. "It's me. They're gone." Jerome emerged, eyes reflecting relief and lingering fear. "Did they believe you, sir?" "I think so, but we can't be sure. They might come back, or they might be watching the house." Jeremiah studied the young man in dim hallway light. The cut had stopped bleeding, but his clothes were torn and dirty. "Sir, I can leave now," Jerome said quietly. "I don't want to bring you more trouble." Jeremiah considered this. Sending Jerome away would be safest. The young man could try to make it home alone, and Jeremiah could return to normal life, hoping Anderson's friends would never discover what he'd done. But he'd seen the terror in Jerome's eyes, heard the genuine fear when he whispered for help. Whatever Jerome had or hadn't done, he didn't deserve to be hunted like an animal. "No," Jeremiah said finally. "You're not going anywhere tonight. It's not safe." Jerome's eyes widened. "Sir, I appreciate what you've done, but if they come back and find me here, then we'll deal with that when the time comes." Jeremiah's voice was firm but kind. "Right now, you need medical attention for that cut, and you need food and rest. Come on." He led Jerome to the kitchen and gestured for him to sit at the small table. As Jeremiah cleaned Jerome's wound with peroxide and applied a bandage, he found himself curious about the young man he was risking so much to protect. "Tell me about yourself, Jerome. Where are you from originally?" Jerome winced as peroxide stung. "Born and raised right here in Franklin County, sir. My daddy worked cotton fields most his life, and my mama took in washing for white families in town. They both passed last year, daddy from a heart attack, mama from cancer." "I'm sorry for your loss," Jeremiah said sincerely. "What about the rest of your family?" "Got a sister up in Detroit. She's been after me to come north, says there's better opportunities for colored folks. But this is home, you know. All I ever known is right here." Jeremiah nodded as he finished bandaging. "What happened tonight? What started all this?" Jerome's jaw tightened. "I was walking home from the sawmill like every day, taking back roads to stay out of everyone's way. But that truck started following me, real slow-like. At first I thought maybe they was heading the same direction, but then they started yelling things." "What kind of things?" "The usual, calling me names, telling me I didn't belong on their roads, saying I was getting too big for my britches." Jerome's voice was bitter. "Then they stopped and got out with them bats, said they was gonna teach me about showing proper respect." Jeremiah felt anger rising. "So you ran?" "Yes, sir, I ain't no fool. 4 grown men with weapons against one of me. I ran fast as I could." Jerome looked down. "Maybe I should have just stopped, let them say what they wanted. Maybe if I'd been more respectful." "No," Jeremiah said sharply, "don't you ever think that. You had every right to walk on that road, and every right to run when threatened. What they were planning wasn't about respect. It was about fear and hatred, plain and simple." Jerome looked up with surprise. "Sir, you don't have to say things like that just to make me feel better." "I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true." Jeremiah sat across from Jerome. "I've lived in this county my whole life. I've seen how things work and how they're changing. What happened to you tonight wasn't about anything you did or didn't do. It was about men scared of losing the only power they've ever known." They sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Jerome spoke again. "Sir, can I ask you something? Why are you helping me? You don't know me, and you're taking a big risk." Jeremiah considered the question. "You ever been in church, Jerome?" "Yes, sir. Every Sunday at Mount Olive Baptist." "Then you know the story about the Good Samaritan. Man got beat up by robbers, left for dead on the roadside. A priest walked by and didn't help. A Levite walked by and didn't help. But a Samaritan stopped and took care of him, even though Samaritans and Jews didn't get along. Jerome nodded slowly. I know the story. Well, tonight you were that beaten man on the roadside, and I had a choice. I could walk by like I didn't see you, or I could stop and help. The way I was raised, there really wasn't a choice at all. Just then, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Martha Foster appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing her bathrobe and looking confused. At 58, she was still handsome, with graying brown hair and kind eyes, crinkled from decades of smiling. Jeremiah, what's going on? I heard voices, and... She stopped as she noticed Jerome at their kitchen table. Silence stretched awkwardly as Martha looked from her husband to their unexpected guest and back again. Martha, Jeremiah said carefully, this is Jerome Washington. He's in trouble, and he needs our help. Martha studied Jerome's bandaged face and torn clothes, taking in obvious signs he'd been through an ordeal. What kind of trouble? Jeremiah explained briefly about finding Jerome hiding in their field and the subsequent visit from Anderson and his friends. As he talked, Martha's expression grew increasingly grave. When he finished, Martha looked at Jerome directly. Are you hurt anywhere else besides that cut? No, ma'am, Jerome replied quietly. Your husband took real good care of me. Martha nodded and moved to the stove. Well, you look like you could use a good meal. Let me fix you something. As Martha began preparing food, Jerome looked at Jeremiah with amazement. Sir, your wife? She's not upset about me being here? Jeremiah smiled slightly. Martha's got a good heart, always has. She might worry about consequences, but she'd never turn away someone who needed help. Martha set a plate of leftover fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans in front of Jerome, along with cold milk. Eat up, she said simply. You look half-starved. As Jerome ate gratefully, Martha pulled Jeremiah aside. What's our plan here? She whispered. We can't keep him hidden indefinitely. I know. I'm still figuring that out. Those men who came looking, are they likely to come back? Maybe. Buck Anderson's not the type to give up easily, especially if he thinks I lied to him. Martha was quiet, then nodded decisively. Then we'd better be prepared for that possibility. She moved to the window and looked out at the dark yard. We need to think about this carefully, Jeremiah. What we're doing. It's not just dangerous for us. If people in town find out we harbored a black man they were hunting, it could ruin us. The bank could call in our mortgage. People could stop doing business with us. I know the risks, Martha. Do you? She turned to face him, eyes serious. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. People will remember what we did, and some will never forgive us. Jeremiah looked at his wife of 34 years, the woman who had stood by him through every challenge. Are you asking me to turn him out? Martha glanced at Jerome, eating his first real meal in probably 2 days, and her expression softened. No, she said quietly. I'm just making sure you understand what you're choosing. We're choosing, Martha. This affects both of us. She nodded and squeezed his hand. Then we'd better figure out how to keep him safe until we can get him somewhere secure. Outside, a truck engine rumbled in the distance, and all 3 people froze. The sound grew closer, then seemed to pass by without slowing. But the message was clear. They were not out of danger yet. The test of courage. At 3:30 a.m., Jeremiah sat at his kitchen table nursing coffee and trying to come up with a plan. Jerome was sleeping fitfully on the living room couch, and Martha had returned to bed after helping set up makeshift accommodations. The farmhouse was quiet except for usual nighttime sounds, but Jeremiah's mind was anything but peaceful. He kept replaying his confrontation with Buck Anderson, analyzing every word and gesture, trying to determine whether his deception had been convincing. Anderson was no fool. He knew Franklin County terrain like the back of his hand and understood how to track both animals and men through rural landscape. If he suspected Jeremiah was lying, he would be back, and next time he might bring more men or involve the local sheriff, known to be sympathetic to Anderson's brand of vigilante justice. Jeremiah was considering these grim possibilities when he heard a soft knock at his back door. His blood froze. Anderson wouldn't knock, and no honest visitor would come calling at this hour. Moving quietly to avoid waking Jerome, Jeremiah crept to the kitchen window and peered through curtains. In moonlight, he could make out a figure on his back porch. A woman, elderly and black, wearing a dark dress and head wrap. Jeremiah opened the door cautiously. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" The woman looked up with eyes that held decades of wisdom and worry. "Mr. Foster? My name is Ruby Johnson. Jerome Washington is my grandson." Jeremiah's heart skipped. "How did you know he was here?" "Word travels fast in the colored community, Mr. Foster. When Jerome didn't come home from work, and when folks heard about men with baseball bats asking questions around town, we knew something bad had happened." Ruby's voice was soft but steady. "I've been walking back roads all night, praying I'd find him alive." Jeremiah opened the door wider. "Come in, Mrs. Johnson. He's here, and he's safe." Ruby stepped into the kitchen and immediately moved toward the living room where Jerome was sleeping. Jeremiah watched as she knelt beside the couch and gently touched her grandson's forehead, her lips moving in silent prayer of thanksgiving. Jerome stirred and opened his eyes. "Grandmama, how did you—" "Hush now," Ruby said, voice thick with emotion. "I'm just glad you're alive." As grandmother and grandson embraced, Jeremiah felt complex emotions. He was relieved Jerome had family who cared, but worried about what Ruby's presence might mean. "Mrs. Johnson," Jeremiah said carefully, "does anyone else know you're here?" Ruby looked up with sharp, intelligent eyes. "A few folks know I was out looking for Jerome, but nobody knows I found him. I was careful." "Good, because the men chasing him came by earlier tonight, and I'm not sure they believed me when I said I hadn't seen him." Ruby nodded grimly. "Buck Anderson and his crew, we know about them. They've been terrorizing colored folks all over the county for months, but the sheriff won't do nothing." Have there been other incidents?" "3 boys beaten so bad they ended up in the hospital. 2 families run out of their homes. And last month," Ruby's voice trailed off, "last month they killed a young man over in Colbert County. Beat him to death with tire irons and threw his body in the Tennessee River." Jeremiah felt sick. "Jesus! The FBI is investigating, but nobody's been charged. These men think they can do whatever they want to colored folks without consequences." Ruby's voice hardened. "That's why what you did tonight matters so much, Mr. Foster. You showed them that not all white folks are willing to stand by and let them commit murder. What I did tonight might have made things worse. If they figure out I was lying, then we deal with that when it happens," Ruby replied firmly. "But right now, we need to get Jerome somewhere safe." Over the next hour, Ruby led Jeremiah and Jerome to a spot deep in woods that bordered the property. Hidden among old-growth oak trees were remnants of a log cabin, probably built by early settlers and long abandoned. "Slaves used this place during the Civil War," Ruby explained as they examined the structure by flashlight. "It's got a root cellar dug deep into the hillside. From outside, you'd never know it was there. The root cellar was indeed well hidden, accessible only through a concealed entrance behind what looked like fallen logs. Inside, it was dry and spacious enough for a man to live comfortably for several days. "We can bring food and water," Ruby said, "and blankets. Jerome will be safe here while we make arrangements." "Mrs. Johnson," Jeremiah said as they walked back in pre-dawn darkness, "how do you know you can trust me? For all you know, I could be planning to turn Jerome in for reward money." Ruby stopped and looked at him directly. "Mr. Foster, when a white man risks his reputation and safety to protect a colored boy he's never met, that tells me everything I need to know about his character." The next 2 days passed in careful planning and nervous vigilance. Jerome spent days hidden in the root cellar, while Ruby made discreet contact with people who could help arrange safe passage out of the county. Jeremiah continued his normal farm routine, but remained constantly alert for any sign that Anderson and his men were planning to return. On the second evening, as Jeremiah finished his chores, he noticed a car parked on the county road near his property line. It sat there for nearly an hour, occupants invisible in gathering dusk, before finally driving away. That night, Martha voiced what they were all thinking. "They're watching us," she said, as she and Jeremiah sat on their porch after Jerome had returned to the hidden cellar. "Buck Anderson knows something's not right. Maybe. Or maybe they're just trying to intimidate us. Either way, we can't keep this up much longer. It's too dangerous for everyone involved." Jeremiah nodded. "Ruby says she should have word about safe passage by tomorrow night. And if she doesn't, Jeremiah looked out across his cotton fields, thinking about generations of his family who had worked this land, built their lives here, raised their children here. "Then we'll figure out something else. But I won't turn that boy over to those men. I can't live with that on my conscience." Martha reached over and squeezed his hand. "I know, and I'm proud of you for that, even if I'm scared about what it might cost us." What neither of them knew was that Buck Anderson had indeed figured out that Jeremiah was lying, and that he was planning to return the following night with twice as many men and determination to search every inch of the Foster property until he found what he was looking for. The final test of Jeremiah Foster's courage was about to begin. The moment of truth. The third night brought oppressive humidity that seemed to press down on Franklin County like a heavy quilt. Jeremiah sat on his front porch, trying to appear casual while constantly scanning the county road for approaching vehicles. Ruby had promised to bring word about Jerome's safe passage by nightfall, but darkness had fallen an hour ago with no sign of her. At 9:30, Ruby finally appeared at the back door, her face grave. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "The people who were supposed to help Jerome get north, they can't take him. Too much heat from the FBI investigation, too many folks being watched." Jeremiah felt his heart sink. "What does that mean?" "It means Jerome needs to stay hidden longer, maybe weeks. Or," Ruby paused, clearly struggling, "or we need to find another way to get him to safety." Before Jeremiah could respond, distant engine sounds broke the night air, multiple vehicles approaching fast along the county road. All three people on the porch froze as headlights swept across the front yard. "Get inside," Jeremiah said urgently. But Ruby shook her head. "If they find me here, it'll just make things worse for everyone. I need to go." She grabbed Jeremiah's arm. "Whatever happens tonight, don't let them break you. Jerome's life depends on you staying strong." She disappeared into darkness just as 3 trucks pulled into Jeremiah's driveway, headlights blazing like searchlights. Jeremiah counted at least a dozen men as they climbed out, all carrying weapons, baseball bats, axe handles, and what looked like shotguns. Buck Anderson led the group as they approached the porch, his face hard with determination. "Evening, Jeremiah. Sorry to bother you so late again." "Buck," Jeremiah replied, keeping his voice steady despite fear coursing through his veins. "What can I do for you?" "Well, that's the thing. We've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and some things just don't add up." Anderson's voice was deceptively friendly, but his eyes were cold as winter. "See, we talked to some folks, and it turns out that boy we're looking for never made it home that night. Disappeared completely. I wouldn't know anything about that." "No? Because the last place anyone saw him was right here on your property line." Anderson stepped closer. "Now either he sprouted wings and flew away, or somebody's been helping him hide." Jeremiah met Anderson's gaze without flinching. "I told you before, Buck, I haven't seen him." Anderson studied Jeremiah's face, then turned to his men. "Boys, I think it's time we conducted a proper search of this property. Mr. Foster here won't mind, will you, Jeremiah?" It wasn't really a question. The men spread out across the yard, some heading toward the barn, others toward outbuildings, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness like swords. "Now, hold on," Jeremiah said, stepping down from the porch. "You can't just come onto my property and—" "Can't we?" Anderson's voice turned hard. "Jeremiah, you're harboring a fugitive. That makes you an accessory to whatever crimes he's committed." "What crimes? Walking down a public road?" Anderson's jaw clenched. "That boy was acting uppity, disrespecting white folks, stirring up trouble. In times like these, that kind of behavior can't be tolerated." As the search continued, Jeremiah prayed silently that Jerome would stay hidden in the root cellar. The abandoned cabin was far enough from the main house that searchers might not venture that deep into the woods, especially in darkness. For the next hour, Jeremiah and Martha watched helplessly as Anderson's men searched every building on the property. They went through the barn, equipment shed, chicken coop, even the old smokehouse. They found nothing, but Anderson seemed increasingly convinced Jerome was somewhere on the property. "He's here," Anderson muttered as his men regrouped. "I can feel it. Nobody just vanishes into thin air." One of the younger men spoke up nervously. "Buck, maybe we should call it off. We've searched everywhere twice." Anderson whirled on him. "We haven't searched everywhere, boy. There's still plenty of woods on this property, plenty of places to hide." Jeremiah's blood ran cold. If they started searching the woods systematically, they would eventually find the old cabin and root cellar. "Buck," Jeremiah said, trying to keep desperation out of his voice, "it's past midnight. Your men are tired and you're trespassing on my property. Maybe it's time to call it a night." Anderson laughed harshly. "Nice try, Jeremiah, but we're not leaving until we find what we came for." He turned to his men. "Spread out and start searching the tree line. Work your way deeper into the woods. He's out there somewhere." As the men began moving toward the woods with their flashlights, Jeremiah knew he was out of time. In another 30 minutes, maybe less, they would find Jerome. He had to do something. The answer came to him in a moment of desperate inspiration. "All right," Jeremiah said loudly. "All right, you win." Anderson stopped and turned back. "What?" "I said you win. You want the truth? Fine. I'll tell you the truth." Martha stared at her husband in horror, but Jeremiah kept talking. "The boy you're looking for, Jerome Washington, he was here 3 nights ago, just like you suspected." A triumphant smile spread across Anderson's face. "I knew it. Where is he?" "Gone," Jeremiah said. "I helped him get to Birmingham 2 days ago. He's probably halfway to Detroit by now." Anderson's smile faded. "You're lying." "No, I'm not. I put him in the back of my pickup truck, drove him to Birmingham myself, and put him on a Greyhound bus heading north. I gave him $50 and told him not to come back to Alabama." The silence that followed was deafening. Anderson stared at Jeremiah with rage and disbelief, while his men looked back and forth between them, unsure what to do next. "You helped him escape," Anderson said slowly. "You betrayed your own race to help a nigger escape justice." Jeremiah straightened his shoulders. "I helped an innocent young man avoid being murdered by a lynch mob. If that's betrayal, then I'm proud to be a traitor." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several of Anderson's men shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this kind of direct confrontation. Anderson's face was purple with rage. "Jeremiah Foster, you have just confessed to a serious crime in front of a dozen witnesses. You helped a dangerous criminal escape, and you're going to pay for that." "What crime?" Jeremiah shot back. "What law did Jerome Washington break? Walking down a public road, working an honest job, going home to his family." "He was uppity," Anderson shouted. "He didn't show proper respect." "Respect?" Jeremiah's voice rose to match Anderson's. "You mean fear, don't you, Buck? You wanted him to be afraid of you, to bow and scrape and act like you were better than him just because of the color of your skin." "I am better than him." "Are you?" "Because from where I stand, you look like a coward who needs a dozen armed men to make himself feel strong. Jerome Washington works an honest job and minds his own business. You drive around in the middle of the night terrorizing people. Which one of you is the better man, Buck?" Anderson raised his baseball bat, face contorted with fury. "You son of a bitch, You're going to what?" Jeremiah interrupted. "Beat me to death in front of my own house, in front of my wife, in front of all these witnesses." Anderson hesitated, bat still raised. Around him, his men were beginning to look uncertain. A few were backing away, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. "Buck," one of the older men said quietly, "maybe we should just go. We got what we came for. The boy's gone." Anderson slowly lowered the bat, but his eyes never left Jeremiah's face. "This isn't over," he said in a voice like ground glass. "You think you're some kind of hero, but you're nothing but a race traitor. And around here, that's something people remember." "Let them remember," Jeremiah replied. I'd rather be remembered as a man who stood up for what was right than as a coward who stood by while innocent people were murdered." Anderson spat in the dirt at Jeremiah's feet. "You'll regret this, Foster. Mark my words, you'll regret this for the rest of your life." As Anderson and his men climbed back into their trucks and drove away, Jeremiah remained standing in his yard, heart pounding, but head held high. Martha came down from the porch and stood beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Was any of that true?" she asked quietly. "About taking Jerome to Birmingham?" "No," Jeremiah replied. "He's still here, still hidden. But I had to tell them something to get them to stop searching. What happens now?" Before Jeremiah could answer, Ruby Johnson emerged from the shadows at the edge of the property. She'd been watching the entire confrontation from a safe distance. "Now, we get Jerome out of here before they figure out you were lying," she said grimly. "What you did tonight bought us time, but not much." Over the next hour, they worked out a plan. Ruby had contacts who could get Jerome safely to Birmingham, but it would require a dangerous nighttime journey along back roads through several counties where Anderson's influence extended. "I'll drive him myself," Jeremiah said. "If we leave before dawn, we can be in Birmingham by afternoon." "Mr. Foster," Ruby said, "if they catch you helping Jerome escape, then they catch me, but at least I'll know I did everything I could to save an innocent man's life." As dawn broke over Franklin County, Jeremiah Foster drove his pickup truck along winding back roads toward Birmingham, with Jerome Washington hidden under a tarp in the truck bed. It was a journey of nearly 200 miles through territory where being caught would mean imprisonment for Jeremiah and almost certain death for Jerome. But as Jeremiah navigated the treacherous route, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, regardless of the cost. They reached Birmingham safely, and Jerome was placed in the care of civil rights activists who helped him get to Detroit, where his sister had found him a job in an automobile factory. Within a week, he was starting a new life in a place where he could walk down any street without fear. The consequences for Jeremiah were swift and severe. Within a month, his bank called in his mortgage. Local businesses stopped trading with him. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to him, but he never once regretted his decision to help Jerome Washington. Years later, after the Civil Rights Act had become law and the social order of the South had changed forever, Jeremiah would receive a letter from Detroit. It was from Jerome, now married with children, working as a supervisor at Ford Motor Company and living the American dream that had been denied to him in Alabama. "Mr. Foster," the letter read, "not a day goes by that I don't think about what you did for me that night. You saved my life, but more than that, you showed me that there were white folks who were willing to risk everything to do what was right. That gave me hope for the future, and it's a hope I'm passing on to my children. They will grow up knowing that when evil seemed strongest, there were still people like you who stood up and said, 'Not on my watch.' Thank you for being the kind of man who heard a whispered plea for help in the darkness and answered with courage." Jeremiah kept that letter in his Bible until the day he died, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come not when we're trying to be heroes, but when we're simply trying to be human. This incredible true story shows us that real heroism isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when faced with moral tests. Jeremiah Foster heard a whispered plea for help in the darkness and chose compassion over comfort, justice over safety. If this story of moral courage inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories that remind us what it means to stand up for what's right. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. Stories like this one happened in communities all across America, and your voice matters in keeping these lessons alive. Remember, we all face moments when we have to choose between what's easy and what's right. When that moment comes for you, I hope you'll remember Jeremiah Foster and find the courage to whisper back to the darkness, "Not on my watch." Until next time, Keep believing in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things.